Hello everyone and welcome to our summer knowledge sharing event where we're talking about our brand new research project, Relationship Buildings. You find us here in the South Wales Valleys where Orangebox have invested in a brand new design centre, a place where hopefully we can drive innovation through our research and product portfolio and hopefully nurture some really young talent coming through our business. Today we're talking about how COVID-19 fractured how we all work globally. So the project that we're discussing, Relationship Buildings, is all about how we reimagine, reinterpret how we all move forward in the changing landscape of work. My name's Nathan Hurley, I'm Research and Insight Manager here at Orangebox, and today we have a collection of contributors for the Relationship Building project. We have Gerard Taylour. Jerry is our creative director here at Orangebox. We have Jim Taylour, who is our head of design and Wellbeing. And we have Luke Palmer, who's a principal designer here at Orangebox. We are discussing a broad spectrum of themes, right through from sustainable futures, right through to how young people are behaving in workplace, our new hybrid workplace, and how we will hopefully be moving forward and designing our spaces. As a research team, we too have been fractured. So over the next 40 minutes, we'll see a collection of audio-visual content in the aim of telling the best story that we possibly can for Relationship Buildings. Our graphic designer, Russell Warren Fisher, has produced a collection of images to help us along the journey. So, without further ado, Jerry, talk to us about what Relationship Buildings is all about.
Why is our project called Relationship Buildings? Because I believe we will need all the help that we can get to be able to move from an old paradigm into a new one. And if we call the project Relationship Buildings, what does that mean? Well, pre-January 2020, we used to go into what we called office buildings. The research shows actually that's a reductive term now. So what if it's not an office building, what is it? And we believe it's about relationships, because we all know coming into the workplace is incredibly valuable components in making an organization successful. But what we've also learned through the last 18 months is that organizations can also be very successful with people distributed. And I think calling it Relationship Buildings is our attempt to help people understand this is a big change. I think if you move out of something for 2 years, it gives fundamental recalibration as to the meaning of work and the meaning of life and the balance between work and life. And we've read globally about the change in the UK. The government introduced a tax benefit which encouraged people to move house. But the amount of people moving to more homes with more space has got a premium that we never imagined that we would value. And I think this is an ongoing project. And the whole point that we will explore during this discussion is that we were originally going to publish this within the document, but actually what we realized is that this as a subject matter is so fluid that to pin it down into a document and say this is the state of play, I think is misjudged, because we want to pick this up maybe on a regular basis and reporting in nuances of, especially nuances as our client networks start to build these new environments. David Remnick, who's a great editor of New Yorker magazine, and he spoke about this scenario of slowly all at once. And at the time I thought that was a great observation, but I actually think it's an even more relevant observation to the state of play today. And the reason that I think we're going to encounter more dramatic change than people are anticipating is because of technology. Because the good companies will be using this inflection point as tactics to achieve a better business, not reacting to try to go back as close to how the organization was functioning previously, but using, because what we realize actually is that a lot of the tech that we were able to use through the last year is actually better for a lot of the work that we were previously doing in a different way. Because of this forced exile, we've learned these lessons, and you can't go back from the lessons that you have learned. So I think both organizations and the people working within organizations are reassessing how is this going to work? And technology is there, and the good companies are the ones who will exploit the technology to make a better organizations. And the ones that don't, I would worry for them, because to try to think you go through a paradigm shift as dramatic as COVID has brought to the workplace with making a few tweaks to how you calibrate the workplace, I think is a fundamental mistake.
So perhaps starting to think that is the idea of 7,000 people coming into one corporate HQ the best way to achieve a brilliant organization, given what we have learned through the last 2 years. And the suggestion behind this report is that to think about relationship buildings is a good beginning of a change of a mindset to achieve work that's more appropriate to the years ahead. One reason that I actually think working from home, hybrid working, will gain traction very quickly is because actually this is not the first time we have discussed the idea of working outside the office. When we were doing our initial research, we came across some wonderful reports from the 1990s. And in the 1990s, the big new subject for discussion was teleworking. And what's interesting about teleworking is that so much of the aspects of the benefits to be gained from working from home, hybrid working, were absolutely articulated in the 1990s as they are now, such as reducing urban traffic congestion, saving energy, and actually improving air quality within our cities. Now, these are all subjects that are really vital today and vital that we address them with creativity. So this is not the first time, and maybe now is the time. Difference between the 1990s and now is that when we're working in a dispersed way, we have amazing technology tools to call upon, tools and the facilities that these tools give us that we couldn't even have imagined in the 1990s. Here we are in the summer of 2021, and we've been talking about the dynamics of the change as a consequence of COVID since last summer, for example, when British Airways flagged the idea of getting rid of their seminal campus building by Heathrow Airport. And obviously, airlines have been impacted by the pandemic much more than many other industries. But what they said was the success of working from home has enabled us to think in a new paradigm way. Do we actually need this to be a brilliant organization? Maybe we don't. I'd like to emphasize through all of the research that I've gone through, one thing keeps coming to the surface is that seemingly small, insignificant dynamics from our daily work life are actually more fundamentally important than we thought. And we often hear this phrase, well, it's the water cooler moment. And I actually think that's quite reductive. It's much more complex than that. And all of the layers that happen through our workday, all of those little collisions and those little encounters are more fundamentally important. Not just to effective working, but actually to happy working, to have an enjoyable day. And what we have to do with relationship buildings is to design buildings that allow these little, in what we think may be insignificant dynamics, actually to be achieved effectively, more effectively than ever been done before. Also, this phrase that we've heard multiple times, 5 years collapsing to 5 months or 10 years collapsing to 10 months. And the phrase that people often cite, well, we were kind of moving in this direction, it's just accelerated it more. It's, of course, more than that, because what has happened is technology has accelerated into the space created by us being away from our workplaces so much. And you know what? Organizations were kind of shocked and pleased by the success of what they achieved, by the success of the adoption of the technologies that were actually sitting on the table previously. But because we needed to, we did. We suffered the pandemic. We're also suffering the dramatic consequences of climate change. And every one of us, we're reevaluating what we need to do and what we don't need to do. For example, in pre-January 2020, we would happily have taken a flight for a 2-hour meeting. My suggestion is that actually more of us will now think, do I need to, or can that meeting actually be achieved just as well with a computer screen? One of the more unexpected finds in the research, and this appeared through a couple of reports, was how important it was to be able to dress when working from home in a more relaxed, casual way. And surveys showed up that even more than traveling, for example, or being able to have more time with family, people really, really appreciated the ability to dress in a more relaxed and a more casual way. Now, we have to see this as being a significant signifier as to what we value. And when we create relationship buildings, we have to learn from this and understand that being comfortable and being comfortable is commensurate towards being much, much happier in how we do works. And maybe the codes and the practices that we used to abide to in office buildings should not translate into relationship buildings. My suggestion is welcome to the new workplace. And this is not a single venue now. This is a portfolio of venues, from traditional offices, home working, distributed hubs, catch-up spaces, membership clubs. All of these assets combine together to create hybrid working that is better for the environment, better for us, and actually better for the organizations we all work within.
And Nathan, a lot of your research has dived into the under 30s because I think it's fundamentally clear the different age bandwidths in the office behave fundamentally different. Do you want to?
Absolutely. Our workplaces are complex social ecosystems. They're finely balanced, they can be delicate, and they're highly tuned to the culture that you are trying to manifest within your business. But the type of shake-up we've seen over the last 18 months can have some really forceful effects on, of course, the behaviours of those within them. This shaking up of a snow globe can be really impactful upon those who work for the business. We often see it when clients of ours move to a new building or a new office, that there is an uptick in pride within that space. There's a positive energy and positive feeling as they move into their new environment. We sometimes see impacts when members of the team either leave or join. That can have subtle effects upon your business culture. My research has exposed that the under 30s may be more impacted by this shake-up than we may first think. If you're to ask yourself the question, are the kids all right? The only answer you could possibly give is no. To weather two economic crises, one at the beginning of your career and one halfway through it, is a major blow to you and your prospects throughout your career. A report from Stanford University indicated that for the first 10 years of your career, if you graduate in a recession, you can see a reduction in your salary of 10% as an average. And in the US, that same report indicated that the first decade after you graduate, you will see 70% of your wage growth throughout your career. And so 10% of that 70% growth is incredibly significant. So are the kids okay? No. Never being able to own your own home. Housing prices, not just here in the UK, globally are skyrocketing as supply can't keep up with demand. We've never seen student debts this high before, ever. Low gross income growth across Europe, and large youth unemployment too across Europe that we're seeing continue. So it's a really anxious perfect storm here. According to the American Psychological Association, Teens reported worse mental health and higher levels of anxiety and depression than all other age groups. So our relationship buildings can play a critical role here in helping our young people's mental health. There is, of course, some hugely positive movements being driven by our younger generations. Think about the equality drive for sexuality, for race, for mental health, and for gender. However, the idea that our young people are job-hopping mercenaries is a myth just circling in the discourse. Statistically, average employee tenure for people under the age of 35 is just under 3 years, and that's basically remained unchanged since 2005-2006. In fact, it's about the same as it was in the mid-1980s. So even though our young people will jump from app to app within a nanosecond, they seem to be sticking to the same traditional building blocks of a career as we've seen throughout the decades. However, there is now a culture of bedroom billionaires. There is a new pleurisy to our young people's career. Technology drives these new opportunities, and so we see side hustles and freelancers and contractors. They're more self-employed people than there ever has been for this age group. So our relationship building should capture this energy, create spaces that harness and manifest this appetite for innovation. The bank of mum and dad was a term popularized in the 2008-2009 financial crash. Hotel mum and dad is our new terminology. We now see figures of our under 30s living at home as high as they were post-World War II, and skyrocketing in the last year, of course, as we locked down as a society. So if you're lucky enough to check out of Hotel Mum and Dad, statistically you're likely to be in a flat share, either with your friends, your colleagues, or some random people you met on the internet. And this has been really challenging over the last 18 months, of course. Young people having to build their desk out of an ironing board in the morning and then collapse it all down in the evening. And if you want to jump onto the dining room table, which is the makeshift office, you're having to compete with 3 or 4 other people to get there before 8:30 a.m. Now, this, of course, has huge implications for our hybrid working future. Not only do you now have to book in when your team members are going to be in, whether that be Monday and Tuesday, you also have to align with all of your housemates to make sure that you've got an appropriate place to work while at home, and all of you as a unit are nicely synced up. Relationship buildings are going to play a critical role for our young people. Society and economic pressures are telling them they'll never own their own home, it's too unaffordable, and now my business is telling me that I can't have an office either. The spaces at which our young people now have at their disposal to work at, whether that be a local coffee shop, co-working space, a flat share, the room that they rent, or a space that they own, or their parents' house, grandparents' house, this bandwidth now, this portfolio of spaces that I can use, really plays into the idea that relationship buildings isn't exactly one fixed location. It's a philosophy, it's an ideology, it's a new working culture. Each one of those spaces will have a different value placed upon it. Our workplaces need to give not just our under 30s, but everybody, something that they can't get at home. Culture that's based on trust, it's built on permission, and it's built upon balance. Relationship buildings for our stressed out under 30s need to play a restorative role. They can't simply be hyper-connected meeting spaces. They need to have a calming mandate as a founding principle. It's not hard to see why this age group of the under 30s want to return to something called the workplace more quickly and enthusiastically than any other when surveyed. They're not just looking for a suitable work surface, they're looking for social interaction. Even in the age of Tinder, a large proportion of us will meet our partners either at our work or within our friendships, workplaces too. So this social dynamic, developing of our softer skills, is really important in these formative years. This disconnection that our young people have been subjected to, or we've all been subjected to, is potentially a business's greatest challenge. We know that the knowledge within an organization isn't in a database. It's residing in people's heads. Forward-thinking organizations are now creating LMS, Learning Management Systems. This is an online ecosystem where knowledge sharing is easy and intuitive. I pop in a few search terms and that immediately leads me to a Teams chat, an instruction manual, an email chain, or even something as simple as an email and a contact phone number. And this draws out all of that knowledge that resides in people's heads, of course. Now, not only does this platform live online, we're going to need to create learning and mentoring spaces within our relationship buildings, places where people can learn and share knowledge. So either in the limelight, within town hall type environments, or in the low light, where we have focused library spaces. So if there were three things that I would say relationship buildings need to provide for our younger people: skill development, spaces for learning and training, stress management. The workplace now needs to be my sanctuary, a place to restore, and emotional intelligence. Over the last 18 months, through these formative years, things like self-awareness, empathy, motivation, enlightenment have all been dampened. Relationship buildings will need to foster these once more. How about open mic night on floor 6 at 6 p.m, or Scottish country dancing before we start work at 7 a.m? These things will play a critical role in the attraction and retention of our best talent. There have been so many new behaviours over the last 18 months, and of course our younger people are early adopters of some of these behaviours. We've seen fake commutes. Podcast listenership has gone through the roof. Meal kit subscriptions, people being exposed to new recipes and foods that they perhaps wouldn't have tried before. Athleisure wear, Jerry's already spoken about. These are now things that make us tick throughout our working days. As Jerry said earlier, we are now more in tune with how we like to work than we ever have been because we've had to. How about podcast rooms where either you can have a space to listen or a space to create your own? How about food club kitchens so you can make great meals with your team? These are all new behaviours that within relationship buildings will create a rich tapestry. The age of data-driven design is upon us. For a decade or more, we've been capturing data within our workplaces. Something as simple as temperature or movement around space. Now we're at a time where we can start to analyse that and design with it within our toolbox. That really helps. It enables us to make design choices based on evidence about somebody's behaviour, attitude, or their need within a space. Workplaces are nowhere near the front of the queue in regards to this technology. Supermarkets and sports teams are way ahead. You can't walk into any supermarket without that experience being dictated to by data. The design of that space is based upon consumer behaviour, from eye tracking technology to even the weather forecast. That space will change depending upon all of these factors. So as we design our relationship buildings, the spaces that we create can't simply rely upon a hunch feeling, intuition, or creative expression from the design team. They will need to be coupled with hard data, insights instead of instinct. There is now an arms race between the biggest design teams to get access to the tools needed to create the data so that we can justify to our clients that this space is healthy, it's working, it's productive. I appreciate from the design community there can be cynicism here. We must proceed with caution. It's not about using all of the data. It's about selecting the ones that really matter to you and your business. We, of course, must make this data capture anonymous. We cannot have a culture of mistrust within our workplaces. Even in recent history, we've seen businesses make faux pas with data capture. It's important that communication is open, transparent. We believe within the relationship building project that data capture and data design needs to create and facilitate human-centered workplaces. Wearables at work are becoming far more commonplace. If my workplace app can tell me at 5:30 that we're expecting thunder and lightning, leave half an hour earlier, or it can highlight when my blood sugar's a little low and order a smoothie for me from the canteen, that's a richer experience for me as an employee. Maps help us see, they help us navigate a brand new city. When we land in Tokyo, the first thing we're going to need is a map to get around and have a rich experience. And that's how we should view this data capture and design. It should be used as an aid to create effective, human-centered spaces. The more data we have, the more detailed our map becomes.
So when we're talking about architects and designers, look, that taps into something that's important to you. How is the dynamics of the circular economy going to be embraced by architects and designers? with real insight.
I think it's worth framing and positioning the circular economy and relationship buildings in a much wider context to start with. On a societal and cultural level, there are also the complex dynamics of the Brexit effect and all of its associated insular behaviours. And now we couple this with the backdrop of a global pandemic. A pandemic that has reminded us that we, and by we I mean all species, are far more connected than we might care to admit. A nice target, but an almost unscalable challenge. The carbon dioxide numbers at play here are so large it's actually overbearing trying to understand them, and our established infrastructures for manufacturing, transportation and energy consumption just do not support this brilliant initiative. We need to demystify what is now necessary to affect the scale of change required to realise the wholesale adoption of carbon-focused circularity across all industry sectors. So how do we shift from linear activities to optimised technical loops that are supported by new technologies for our recycling infrastructure? The harsh truth is with very small incremental steps. And realistically, the pace that we're collectively moving at isn't going to get us to zero anytime soon. Self-governance is key. Life cycle extension via remanufacturing and end-of-life stewardship are critical factors in mitigating CO2 trends for all sectors of industry. In the office furniture sector, some of our European counterparts are leading the charge in this respect, and there are circular economy standards currently in development, but these take time to evolve. So in the meantime, total product stewardship has to be our main priority. Acknowledging the complexity of circular economy in practice is actually a good place to start. And I strongly believe that a macro model where external relationships with the key actors that are enabling material flows through your business into use cycles and culminating in end-of-life recovery have to be embedded in the ownership loops. These cycles form the fundamental core principles for circular economy in practice. How hard can it be to get some timber that is felled locally into one of our new woods planter systems? Oak, poplar, or ash dieback would be amazing. Impossible is the short answer. And as devastating as this scenario is, we find ourselves hosting discussions with local councils, forestry commissions, forestry management bodies, and a collection of small-scale manufacturers who are passionate about reversing what has been a devastating trend for product and skills. Geography is obviously key, and establishing local supply chains as close to home as possible is also beneficial for the wider ecosystems. We should be championing the resurgence of scalable cottage industry, as opposed to the continued exploitation of the cheap and the fast from the far reaches of the globe. Businesses should be rewarded for developing such initiatives to help soften the clear and present threat of outpricing yourself in an effort to keep it local. Solving this problem requires engagement from all aspects of the manufacturing and client arenas. This shared responsibility model will inevitably facilitate healthier, longer-term relations with material suppliers and end users alike. Invested relationships that are focused on our natural and technical resources, where materials are cherished regardless of age and condition. As a manufacturer, if you know you are going to get something back from your customer in 5, 10 or 15 years' time, then you design it in such a way that it can be managed efficiently upon its return. Your suppliers also have to be integrated into the process, as they'll be part of the solution, and clients need to change buying attitudes and behaviours with regards to the prevalence of life cycle extension, reappropriation and remanufacturing. Rebalancing CO2. Proactive regeneration of woodland is now mission critical. Certified offsetting initiatives need upscaling globally and at an unprecedented rate. Consider that at our current rates of consumption, each of us should already be planting 6 trees per month. Manufacturers need measure their operational impacts and material consumption to offset the associated CO2. End users also need to offset their furniture portfolios. This, in effect, is double counting, but that's the kind of swing we need to get carbon dioxide under control. The era of guilt-free consumption is behind us. Orangebox is investing in local tree planting schemes that our people and our customers can connect with. This approach has so many positive elements that we are excited by its potential to close some of our future loops for manufacturing. Ally this with local economic stimulus, and there's no downside to this initiative. My colleague Jim will talk to you later about the 20-minute neighbourhood. And what I'm really excited about from a circular economy perspective and the relationship building element of that is how an awareness that the factory 2 minutes away could be bringing in the raw materials and producing the furniture that you're sat on in the office next door. And making that clear and visible to all so that we appreciate the roles that we all play and how closely connected our ecosystems actually are. Wellbeing and sustainability, or people and place as we call it, are the hot topics in every commercial furniture forum across the globe, and we think that's a first. There is a persistent and pervasive attitude across the commercial interior landscape at present that is strongly biasing towards conscientious product stewardship on a scale not seen before. Leading architectural practices themselves are shifting to a solid environmental baseline approach with disciplined self-governance as a key driver in client attraction and retention. Net zero targeting is a key component of the conversation, and embedded CO2 is front and centre, and we should be celebrating that alone. And of course, the A&D community are responding to client and customer-driven ambitions to help them rethink their buying behaviours. Focusing on upfront embedded carbon is a big part of the problem, but a good steward needs to consider the whole. For example, a product with a low carbon score, an EPD or an LCA, but with no opportunity for life cycle extension or closed-loop remanufacturing is actually a very short-sighted decision in the current climate. It's much more complex than just ticking boxes. Both individually and collectively, we don't have the capacity to accurately visualize the carbon accruing as a result of our day-to-day activities. The problem? It's invisible. On a positive note, and to qualify the material savings on a product basis, this is what 2 decades of dematerialization looks like for us. An equivalent chair 20 years ago was twice the factor in weight. And small gains will no doubt be made by further design enhancements, but unless we radically change the material pool we manufacture our products from, we are already close to the limits of feasible material efficiencies. The green shoots of good stewardship are coming through thicker and faster than at any other time in history. You could say since the Industrial Revolution. Responsible, conscientious, sustainable commerce is maintaining pole position in the sales arena during these tough economic times, and we believe that's a first. Big business is, after all, at its core, people, and people are now more knowledgeable about the effects of climate change than ever before. Skeptics will say price wars will win the day, and in some instances this will be the case. However, paying up for the sustainable option is now part of the conversation. Big brands and independent companies alike that are planning to succeed in today's markets will need to demonstrate their environmental pedigree to their loyal customers, the people, or risk being marginalised in the shift towards greater stewardship for all.
So Jim, you came across this fabulous idea that the workplace could be a wellness, that relationship buildings is more about wellness than illness.
Why does it take a global pandemic and the tragedy and misery around that to jolt us into being a bit more disciplined about health? I can remember my grandparents talking about coughs and sneezes spread diseases, but they went through the Spanish flu, and maybe we just kind of got a little bit more slack as time went on. Shakespeare was plagued by it. His plays were creatively influenced by it, and you can track it even back to the original traders coming out of China and the Mediterranean 2,000 years ago. Good health isn't merely the absence of disease, but covers physical, mental and social well-being. So the question here is, how can we thrive in the VUCA world of work? For many, it was an absolute liberation from the office, the first lockdown, and having more control and spending time at home with family. But for others, we've seen increased ailments on all fronts. So I do need to cover these. Some are new and some are an exaggeration of topics that ergonomists have been concerned about for a while. But just imagine all your work-based conversations taking place through a screen at a table and chair that maybe was improvised first time round, and you are going to increase the risk of potential issues. One thing's for certain through talking with practitioners in the circles I operate in is that we've seen more complaints about visual strain. We've seen more neck pain with laptops not being elevated. And on the mental health front, it's not easy for company leaders and HR departments to track mental health. And there seems to be a sort of disparity between what they're feeling with productivity and actually the surveys when they ask the employees themselves, because you can't really tell remotely how people are really feeling, once the camera's switched off. So in terms of new strains of ill health, long COVID is a topic that we don't fully understand. My colleague Leon has been looking into this, and it affects a great many people, maybe up to 30%, who will have symptoms for 12 months and beyond. So how can we create a workspace that might allow for more personal control if people are a little bit more sensitive to light or other stimuli, or undersensitive? And these are things that we really need to think about because some of the side effects are neurological. Topics like ME, which in itself, amongst those who don't have ME, is a difficult subject for people to get their heads around. So how do we make the workspace more inclusive? But imagine bigger amounts of death accumulating every year, and that is the case with subjects like obesity, 2.8 million related deaths last year, and other respiratory diseases, 3 million deaths every year. And we're moved quite often with the vulnerable and the young. Malaria sadly kills up to 500,000 infants in Africa every year. So it matters now more than ever because it's brought some of these things into sharp focus. And on top of that, I think organisations should take the opportunity to revisit their mission and their values and their purpose. I think, COVID has maybe provided us with an audience that is a little bit more ethically driven than before, having experienced the wonders of no cars on the streets, seeing the Black Lives Matters movement, the equality agenda with more men working at home and contributing to the family dynamics, but also the higher presenteeism that we're not able to track. Subjects like boredom, which you might not think contributes to stress, but often does, and for many on furlough, or being put in temporary roles that don't seem to be particularly fulfilling during a crisis, have all added to the idea that we really should take this opportunity to make a difference. A new chapter, you might say, where health, well-being and sustainability are at the forefront of every decision-making process. And don't we deserve something that is more than just stopping the spread of disease, but something that's going to actually perk us up a bit? My mate, Professor Patrick Jordan, talks about the 4 pleasures fundamentals, and it's a great way of actually making sure you've covered all bases, whether it's physiological, psychological, sociological, or ideological. And I'm going to just touch on 1 or 2 of these now. Let's talk about comfort, because quite often ergonomics is just perceived as something to do with preventing back pain or posture or getting the dimensional fit correct. But sensory ergonomics is another layer of comfort that we should deploy. Whether it's psychoacoustics, whether it's visual, whether we're making more use of the displays around the office because we're keeping in touch with our hybrid colleagues, whether it's smell, whether it's taste, we want to immerse the user and make it a pleasurable experience, particularly now. I mean, humour is a serious subject and has been found to improve productivity and wellness. Depending on the activity and the culture, the environment is a really exciting and interesting one, or a serene and calm one. And not just human-centred. Fitness-centred is maybe where we should be at, so that we can measure people's physical and mental health at the end of a working day, and they can feel happier and fitter towards the end of the week, rather than drained and tired. And we can't wait for the standards to help guide us, because a lot of the ergonomic standards really only revolve around the mannequin on the right there when they're at a workstation. And if we're going to share our workplaces far more than ever before, because we're only in 3 days a week, there's going to be a lot of situations where we're going to have to improvise with the workspace and feel empowered to get on with other kinds of activities in different scenarios. And let's drive the ergonomic footprint beyond the workstation. I like the idea, if we're going to have less allocated workspaces, that we have bench heights with perching scenarios. It's far more sociable. The idea of the sort of bar height conversation, there's eye-to-eye contact. You could say you're a little bit more on your mettle. You can see people approaching. And it's actually a little bit more economic with space, so that you can still have better flows around clusters if we still need to do a bit of social distancing. We've certainly done a lot in higher education that has gone through a renaissance recently, and I've been involved in some academic learning laboratories for schools where, you know, they're measuring how attainment improves when you deploy ergonomics in those situations. And I think we can reverse that back into the workplace. So if you applied that theory to a fixed or mobile workroom, there could be all sorts of functions going on from day to day. So the ability for it to flex, depending on whether it's a playroom, a hobby room, a secret room, immersive, a refuge room, a feedback with a mentor or superior, a learning room, a mindful room, a VC room, a team bonding room, a yoga room, a place to grow plants. You know, the list is endless, and being able to change the mood and function at fairly short notice could be a real advantage. So encouraging organisations to revisit their purpose is an important one, because even before COVID, 80% recognised that it was a really important factor, but only a third of them really knew what it was and what it meant for them. There are tools and techniques we can use to tease that out, and there'll be some new heroes over the last 18 months and new rituals that will be worth developing. And as I say, I don't want this all to come across as doom and gloom. And the exciting thing is, we think you can design with wellness. We've just finished a piece of research with one of our PhD students from the psychology department at Cardiff University, looking at the effect that real estate has on well-being. Of course, we all want job security as a foundation, but do you try and change behaviour? We've been talking about culture, and then redesign the space, or do you use the space to help you with your goals in having a more sort of positive outlook and behaviour within the organisation? Relationship buildings needn't just be a term, of course, for improving the content of your office, but it's about the relationship within the community itself, whether it's a city and a headquarters that attracts people in, or whether it's in a suburb, a town or village, or indeed your own home. We can get some inspiration from the original founders of the Garden City movement 120 years ago that the TCPA are revising for 21st century living. In our context, it's easy to overlay the possibilities of hybrid working from the home, where we might issue a bronze, silver, gold for home living. The bronze means getting the basics right if you're only working there very casually, through to the gold, where you're there the majority of time and really leveraging the local community. We can do better, can't we? Let's stop seeing the building as a problem and see it as the wellness solution. And by recalling the office relationship buildings, it puts that first and foremost in our minds when we come to apply design for the office of the future.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I hope that you got a sense of the passion that we all have for the project that we've been working on. It's not the end of the road for relationship buildings, of course. We have 3 separate CPDs/CEUs that we will be delivering throughout the summer and later into the year. And that's a great opportunity to get feedback from yourselves. Well, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you soon.